Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to another episode of Dean's Dialogue. I hope you're doing well. My name is Dean Meadows. I'll be your host as always, right? It's good to be with you again on this fine Thursday. I hope your week has been going well. So today we're going to move away from the Synoptic Gospels and look at the authorship for the book of John. And as I stated before in previous episodes, I noted that we would take a look at some preliminary issues with Matthew, Mark, Luke as far as authorship and dating. And then we would move to the Gospel of John because it is so unique. It is so different in scope. And so that's just kind of way that I've decided to do it. But before we start, there's some in-house information that you need to be aware of and that you need to tune in for. By the way, before we get to that, today is Take Your Friend to Work Day. So say hi to my stormtrooper. He's a pretty cool guy. Nothing like a cup of joe at 3 p.m. Anyways, on to the news and notes for Apologia. 11:30 tomorrow, I will be doing a live YouTube interview with one of our guest writers by the name of Forrest Antimasaurus. He does the podcast, Theology, etc. He's about to be a graduate of Freed Hardeman. He is recently married. Congrats to Forrest and his lovely wife. But what's really cool that I found out about Forrest is that he was an atheist and he's now a Christian. And so we're going to have a conversation about his journey, and that's 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. So adjust your time as needed to catch all of that interview. So that'll be on YouTube. That'll be on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com. In the search bar, type in Apologia Institute. Our channel will come up, and you'll see the live feed. So 11:30 sharp Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. Also, later down the line in September, from the 13th through the 16th, if you're in the Denver, Colorado area, even if you're not in the Denver, Colorado area, you need to get to the Bear Valley Church of Christ lectureship. This year, the lectureship has an apologetics theme. It's called We Can Know That God Exists. There are going to be a bunch of great speakers there. It's always a great lectureship, but this year I'm just amped and juiced because it's got an apologetics theme and because I'm an apologetics nerd. Also, Nathan Liddell, who's another member of the organization here, he'll be speaking on the moral argument. I'll be doing a youth track on Saturday where I am going to be able to introduce all the youth that show up to my friend Aaron the Atheist, and some of you guys who have met him before kind of know what that's like. So that's going to be really cool to do that. If anybody from Bear Valley is watching, thank you so much for that opportunity. We are humbled by that, and we know that that's going to be a great time of education, a great time to be edified, and a great time to fellowship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. So, onward as we talk about the authorship of the Gospel of John, let's dig. So, as with the Synoptic Gospels, one of the things that we want to first do is we want to look at external evidence outside of the writing itself that would help us in trying to figure out who actually wrote this document, right? So what we have so far from church history, as far as we know, is that the 2nd century church father Tatian, in his writing, the Diatessaron, he sought to harmonize the 4 Gospels. And what's interesting about that is that he used John's Gospel as the base to fit the other 3 in, and he attributes that to John. There's also another, and these are all 2nd century guys. Theophilus of Antioch quotes the first 5 verses of John's Gospel and attributes that to the Apostle John. Irenaeus, who shows up over and over and over again, he quotes several verses from the Gospel of John and attributes it to John, the disciple of the Lord. Now, what's interesting about Irenaeus' work is that he is using the Gospel of John to distinguish Orthodox Christianity from Gnostic doctrine. And so, what's also interesting about John that's similar to the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is that no other Orthodox writer ever proposes any other alternative author for this gospel. And what's also noted is that this is also accepted by all early canonical lists. There's just no other tradition or authorship assigned in history to this work other than the Apostle John. So, once again, skeptics or critics who say, "Man, I just don't think that John wrote this gospel. There's this possibility. There's this possibility. There's that possibility." They can, and I say this with respect. I'm not trying to be mean, but they can possibility, all they want. In order to overturn what we have in church history, there has to be actual documentation and overwhelming documentation to overthrow John as the author of the Gospel of John. So once again, I want to make sure that you understand that people can throw out possibility after possibility after possibility, and we should let them voice that. But then we have to come back and say, okay, so what do we actually have as far as historical evidence against John's Gospel? So make sure that we note that when we're having a dialogue with our friends about that. So now we look to internal evidence. Now we've looked outside of the gospel. Now, what do we find when we look inside the gospel? And this is where John, I believe, is completely different than the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because here there are 5 pieces of internal evidence, which I think points to John as the author. 1, the author was Jewish. 2, he was from Palestine. 3, he was an eyewitness. 4, he was an apostle. And 5, I think is actually John. Now, this argument isn't original with me. This is originally set forth by B.F. Westcott in 1908. And the reason that I'm using his argument is because I find his argument, 1, to be fascinating, but 2, I think it's a pretty strong argument. I think what he lays out is pretty good. So let's look at that first piece of evidence that's in the gospel, that the author was Jewish. It's clear that as you move through the Gospel of John, the author accurately understands Jewish customs. He's steeped in the Old Testament. He's aware of the finer points of distinction among pre-70 AD Jewish sects. The author is also concerned about Jesus fulfilling the law, and he's also familiar with a number of rituals and institutions of Judaism. So it seems that the guy who's writing this is writing this with good knowledge of Judaism. So he's probably Jewish. And the second piece is that he was from Palestine. As we look at this document, we can see that the author had great knowledge of the geography and the topography of Israel, particularly in Jerusalem and in the Judean countryside. Now, he mentions some really significant places in those areas. He mentions the Pool of Siloam, he mentions the Pool of Bethesda, and he mentions Jacob's Well. All of these would have been significant and understood by people who were familiar with Jerusalem, who would have been familiar with Judea. Also, there's some Aramaic terms that are employed and explained in the gospel. And so only people of the nation of Israel and Jews still widely used Aramaic rather than Greek during this time frame. So it's pretty, I think, pretty clearly seen that he was Jewish and that he was from Palestine based on what we've seen so far. Now the question was, is he an eyewitness? And if we look through the Gospel of John, what we see is that there are specific details of person, of time, of number, of place, manner of action, and many of these are highly precise, but they're not theologically motivated. And I think maybe the greater case would be the fact that over and over again, this author uses the first person plural, right? In John 1:14, John 19:35 are examples of that, which suggests that whoever is writing this gospel is writing it from the perspective that they themselves were participants in the events described. It's not a third person. It's a first person perspective. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that the author was an eyewitness. Also, I think the author was one of the 12. The individual claim of John 21:24 is that the individual who is referred at several points in this gospel is the person is given the title the beloved disciple, or the disciple whom Jesus loved. And it seems that this person was the author. So the question is, who was this person? Who's the best candidate for being the disciple whom Jesus loved or the beloved disciple? But this phrase is also used, and before we get to that, this phrase is also used at some very intimate points between Jesus and his 12 disciples, right? So this phrase shows up when this figure is a part of the Last Supper, John 13:23-25. It's at the crucifixion, 19-26, or chapter 19, 26-27, verses 34-35. This person is at the empty tomb, John 20:2-5, verse 8. This person is fishing in Galilee, post-crucifixion and appearance of Jesus. That's John 21:1-7. Now, if we look at the synoptics will tell us that it was John and Peter who were there. So there's some kind of collaboration between the beloved disciple who's at the tomb and, hey, John and Peter were the only disciples who were initially at the tomb. Now, could it be Peter? Well, doubtful. Because what we see in the Gospel of John, or what I'll say is the fourth Gospel, is that Peter is mentioned alongside the beloved disciple. So if Peter is mentioned alongside the beloved disciple, then he can't be the beloved disciple, right? Well, what about the other member of Jesus's inner circle? Jesus' inner circle was James, Peter, and John. We've already eliminated Peter from being that anonymous person. But what about James, the brother of John? Well, unfortunately, he was killed in AD 44, Acts 12:1-2. So it's highly unlikely that this gospel was written in AD 40s. So that eliminates James, the brother of John. So James, the brother of John, just kind of a review. James, the brother of John, is martyred, so he couldn't have written the gospel given the dating of the gospel, which we'll get to in the next episode. And Peter can't be the beloved disciple because he's mentioned alongside the beloved disciple in many of these instances. But the synoptics say that John and Peter were at the empty tomb. The Gospel of John says that the beloved disciple and Peter were at the empty tomb. Therefore, the best case of who is probably the beloved disciple would be John, the apostle of Jesus. Now, I think that this is also supported by a little nuance that's seen in the fourth gospel rather than the first three. So when we look at the fourth gospel, we see that the name John is completely absent in reference to John, or excuse me, the moniker John the Baptist is not used in the Gospel of John. It simply just says John came and he was baptizing. John came and he did this, and Jesus and John were baptizing in this area. And so the moniker, the Baptist, is completely absent from that gospel. Now, why not make that distinguishing marker between John the Baptist and John the Apostle? Well, if the disciple is writing to a community who knew him well and knew that the gospel came from him, this could be understandable, right? Furthermore, it is interesting that if John the Apostle wasn't writing this and it was somebody else, why in the world would someone write a gospel that has John the Apostle in it and John the Baptist in it, and not make or not have that distinguishing mark and say, hey, John the Baptist came, this isn't John the Apostle there? It doesn't seem likely that that would take place. But once again, if the audience knew that this was John the Apostle, and they knew about his relationship with Jesus, and that was kind of a title that was given to him that he carried with him, they could easily identify the difference between the John in the beginning of the book and the John that's noted, or the beloved disciple that's noted in these other instances. And so they would know that it wasn't John the Apostle that was baptizing, but it was John the Baptist that was baptizing. So there you have it. That's the internal and external evidence for the Gospel of John. I think we have good, strong evidence from history, and even when we look into the book and kind of mix and match some things from the synoptics to say that most likely the best case that can be made, the overarching historical narrative, is that John the Apostle wrote the fourth Gospel. So remember, tomorrow, don't miss the YouTube live interview at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. It'll be me with Forrest Animasaurus. And Monday, we'll get back on track with our Reliability of the New Testament deal, and we'll look at the dating of the Gospel of John. So thank you once again for all those who watch, for all those who listen on SoundCloud, for all those who pray for us, for all those who've partnered with us monetarily. We greatly appreciate it. We can't do what we do without you guys, and we hope that this information and content has been edifying for you. And remember, equip yourself to engage culture. This is Dean Meadows signing off of Dean's Dialogue. Have a great day, and God bless.